I'm going to start back with this image. I'm not quite sure what the lecture will be about tonight. I'm still debating about it. We were talking about this last week, and I was saying that in my view, the thing that I'm kind of centrally focused in my internal practice these days is in memorizing this so that I can see a picture of it in my head and place the various parts of it in my body. And as an aid to that, I am also learning all the lines. I'm trying to learn all the lines that go with it. Now this, starting on it, we always start on it and we never get very far. It's complicated. But I'll tell you a few things about it that are interesting. One of the main things is that to the left here are two poems, one by the heart and one by the iron ox. And in my researches, I have discovered that these are pulled from the annals of Lu Dongbin from the 15th century. Now, of course, Lu Dongbin was born in the 8th century. So he was, by the time of the 15th century, of course, an immortal. And there was a whole cult, and there still is, around using him as a source for internal alchemy texts. So these two poems are from an alchemical text that he wrote, maybe through somebody else's actual body, or who knows? It's just part of the tradition. He was said to be the immortal that founded the Guanjin Taoist sect, of which our teacher's teacher was a member. So I've always kind of been interested in him, though I've never been one for organized religion. And the Guanjin Taoist sect is an organized religion like any other. It has outfits and it has precepts and it has things you're supposed to believe and all of that. And I don't feel an affinity toward anything like that. But the guy who taught Wong, who taught us, him I have a real affinity toward, and he may have just been hiding out in the Guanjin, because he started out as essentially a scholar warrior in Sichuan, and part of the revolution that took down the Qing dynasty. But he was on the run for a lot of years politically and basically hid out by becoming a Taoist. Now, I think he was a serious Taoist, and I think he truly practiced internal alchemy, and I think he taught as much of that as you could teach a 10-year-old boy in the couple of years that he taught him. But I really believe that it is connected to this bigger system that was a part of, or at least carried in Guanjin, that may be older than that. But this guy, Lu Dongbin, has something to do with it. He was pictured as a Taoist scholar with a jin, a sword in his shoulder, and very upright and intellectual. But apparently he was willing to talk to mortals, and you can still find places in Chengdu where he'll speak through a medium there. But in any case, these two poems, I think, are kind of the best place to start. And they are both 8 lines long of 7 characters each, and point out where it is replicated in other places in the chart, as the lines of the poem are imaged in the various figures that are placed inside this body. And I'm going to stop with all this very quickly and go a completely different direction. Some of them correspond to the pictures, and some of them are more abstract. The first one is iron ox plows the earth, plants gold coins. Now you remember in the bottom there is a picture of a guy plowing with an ox. However, the line isn't placed next to him. The line is placed up above for some reason. The next line is then, the carving stone boy holds a string of cash. Now, you remember the picture. You go back to the picture, and there is, in the middle of it, a line that replicates that. It's right there next to the Big Dipper. It also says, stone carving boy holds a string of cash. And it was on this line we were working last week, and
I got a little carried away with your question.
well, a serious question, an actual serious question that's hard to take too seriously, but in fact, from the tone of voice that it was said in, and I'll show you the tone of voice that it was said in. I'm going to try anyway.
Like, why call it that? Why not call it like diamonds or pearls or, like sparkly things or...
I know that was a lot of trouble for that line, but it was such a great line. and really comes to the heart of a particular question in terms of working with ancient texts. And to that end, I'm going to give a somewhat circuitous answer. This is the first book about any kind of internal practice that I ever encountered. It's a bound book. It was published in 1959. I somehow came upon it, and I can't remember exactly how, but I was in high school. And I was interested in religions. It would have been 63, 64, around in there. I was a junior maybe in high school. It for me was, I had studied, Protestantism and Judaism and Mormonism and Catholicism and the different religions that were around in Pocatello, and all of them seemed pretty nonsensical to me, but interesting. Just their cosmology was interesting. And then I got this, and it has all of these short little stories. It's basically a book of Zen koans. And I don't know how familiar you guys are with koans, but I'll tell you how they are used in Zen or Chan Buddhism. Basically, they are a little story, sometimes even a word, sometimes just the word mu is given to a student as something for them to contemplate. This is the short title of the lecture is Distinguishing Between Contemplation and Speculation. Speculation. The basic theme of the lecture is learning to make a distinction between contemplation and speculation, which is critical in terms of working with sacred texts, in my opinion. Some of these stories were funny, some interesting, some I liked. One was like, a monk came to the master Nansen and asked, "Tell me, is there some teaching that no master has ever taught?" Nansen said, "There is." The monk asked, "Can you tell me what it is?" Nansen said, "It is not Buddha, it is not things, it is not thinking." So I found these very striking and interesting, and I read them all. But there was one that I particularly thought was kind of stupid and I didn't particularly like, but I remembered. So I'm going to read it for you. The official Raiko once asked Nansen to explain to him the old problem of the goose in the bottle. "If a man puts a gosling into the bottle," he said, "and feeds the gosling through the bottleneck until it grows and grows and becomes a goose, then there is just no more room inside the bottle. How can the man get it out without killing the goose, or breaking the body?" Or that's the punchline. I can edit I can do it again and edit all the rest out. And see, although this is totally directed toward you, because I can't speak without an audience. And these guys have heard all my stories. You're a fresh victim. In reality, I'm putting it out to the universe in a permanent form on a CD card. And someday there will be people who are really interested in what I have to say, who will get it. Okay, I'm going to read this line again. And feeds the gosling through the bottleneck until it grows and grows and becomes a goose, and then there is just no more room inside the bottle. How can the man get it out without killing the goose or breaking the bottle? Rico, shouted Nansen. The goose is out. That's the story. That's the call. I thought, oh, that's stupid. That's kind of annoying. It's kind of, oh yeah, I propose it as a paradox, and then the teacher gives them a shock, and they realize it's just a mind trip. It's a very obvious, very kind of simple sort of riddle, but in reality, these Zen, if you go to a Zen temple and you join the outfit, they may give you a koan like that, and even though you have an immediate solution to it and it seems stupid, they say this is why you have to contemplate. Don't try to speculate about what it means, about where it comes from. You just have to learn the words of the koan and let it sit in you and see what happens. And from what I've heard, since I've never had a koan given to me by a Zen Roshi, what I've heard is that you come with what you think is an explanation. The Roshi always tells you, no, that's bullshit. You're just thinking, you're just speculating, you're just trying to make stuff up. Sit with it and really let it settle in your heart and see what comes. And that may go on for years and years. And finally, according to the stories, the student gets it, and I don't know what he says to the Roshi, but the Roshi says, yeah, you've got it. And that's the question, how do you finally get the approval that you understand this stupid riddle and can let it go? Mm-hmm.
So then is the understanding different for each student? Or is there only one understanding?
There is just understanding. But what someone does to demonstrate that understanding may be absolutely unique. But there certainly is no one right answer. That's part of the practice.
Do you still think that riddle is stupid, or that koan is stupid?
Well, let me continue with the story.
Okay.
I need a little more cognac, though. How much time do I have? I'm in good shape. So
9 o'clock stop timer?
9 o'clock is
Yeah,
it?
about half an hour. A little less than half an hour.
Yeah, okay. So I go into terms, I go in search of a Zen master, of course, and you take the best that you have around, and I did find somebody that really helped and gave me a foundation for my internal practice. And we formed this whole community, and we built a school, and we had sacred movements, and we grew vegetables, and then the whole thing got weird politically, and with sex and affairs and politics, and you know how it goes, and you haven't done all this. This is what I did in my 20s. And it was the 70s. You joined a cult. You tried to make the world a better place by dropping out and building a new kind of relationship with people. And hopefully pulling on wisdom from ancient times. in the middle of a great deal of emotional turmoil and drama and conflict, I heard about this guy in India, named of Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh. And there was a community there that was working, and that was based on a different kind of approach than we had at the little farm that we had. And I got more and more. I had 3 children and a wife and a job, and things kind of blew up, and my wife believed that the only thing that would save us, the marriage in the world, is if she went to India to be with Bhagwan. So she did that and came back functional enough so that I then went to India in the hope that I could work with someone who really understood and knew what they were doing. And I went in January of 1981. And that was kind of an odd time at that ashram in that place. And basically when you go there, and you ask to become, you ask to have contact with Bhagwan, and they tell you, well, the only contact you could have is if you decide to take sannyas and become a sannyasin, which basically means you wear red head to foot all the time, and you wear a necklace with his picture on it, which really immediately marks you as a kook in general society. And that's the way you meet him, essentially, is in that ceremony. And I was all for it. I'd spent a year, yearning to do this, to go to Pune and to have this experience. And they said, well, no, you can't do it. You can't just come and do it. We don't know whether you're really serious about it. First, you have to do groups. Well, groups were both a way to weed out people who were psychotic, which a lot were who came, and also to suck all the money that people had in order to support the ashram. And they were actually really good therapy groups of people who did all of this stuff, like at Esalen and places like that in the 70s, and who'd gotten disillusioned and come to Pune and were doing all kinds of things were there. And basically you paid a moderate amount and you did these very intense groups. And one of them that they instructed me that I needed was called the Enlightenment Intensive. And they said basically it was 3 days of focusing on the question of who you are. And I thought, that's cool. I can do that. I have lots of, I've had lots of great experiences. I can talk a lot about who I am. So you sign up and you're in this room, and you're in one large room, like maybe twice the size of this, and there's maybe 30 people all seated on the floor in front of each other. And they ring a bell, and one person asks the other person, tell me who you are. And this is the exercise, you are required to answer, to tell who you are. And so I start in telling all about where I grew up, and the monitor comes along and says, no, not talk about what you've done or where you've been or what you think. Tell her who you are. Well, that's another question. And they wouldn't let you just talk. You basically had to really look in and ask yourself, who am I? And say something. It was required that you say something for these intervals. And then, in a certain interval, they'd ring the bell and it would go the other way. And for me, within 10 minutes, it was like, well, this is bullshit. This is not a question that can be answered. You can't tell somebody who you are, but this is the exercise, and you have to do it because you signed up. And this is like for 3 days. back and forth like this, sitting on mats, facing each other, And then at night you lay out mats and sleep together, and when you go to the toilet, you go all as a group, and there's one huge room with a line of toilets and a line of showers, and you all go to the toilet together and shower together, and you're together with these 30 people asking this question for 3 days. Again, so there were certain breaks. You had breaks for the meditations in the morning and the evening, and maybe a walk. And you slept all in the same room together, and the food was like very, very simple, like a piece of bread and maybe some dal and a piece of fruit. And very, very slight and very dull. So you had people just totally freaking out. And I was kind of offended and thought it was a rip-off, and it was kind of a stupid thing to do, and complained about it in my mind. And but I didn't have the guts just to walk out and say, fuck this, this is not relevant, I'm not gonna do this. And in the middle of it, one of the monitors announced that one of his closest friends, one of the guys who used to do this with them, monitor these groups, had just had a brain aneurysm. And he was like a German prince, a cousin of Prince Charles, who had been there to visit him, and had been a guard at Bhagwan's gate, and he'd been practicing kung fu, and he had this brain aneurysm, and his brain was functionally dead, and they were just keeping him on life support for some reason, because Bhagwan thought he needed to go through some process because he was going to become enlightened. And this, and so you could see these guys were all emotional about their friend dying suddenly. And for me, this is odd that I'm in this strange cult, and you can see in one sense, oh, this is interesting that there was a German prince there that had this aneurysm and died. But you know that in the European press, it's going to be this big deal. This German prince has died in this weird sex cult. And that it was very strategic of Bhagwan to declare that he had become enlightened. He just hadn't had a brain aneurysm and died, but he'd become enlightened and had left this body. And then when I came out of this 3-day thing was the day of the funeral, and Rajneesh gave this whole thing about this was not a time to be sad. This guy had become enlightened, so let's have a great party. And they started playing rock and roll music, and everybody's dancing and singing and having a good time, and they carry his body down. And this is very weird after this experience of 3 days. Asking who you are. But I remember like the last moment of the experience that, they ring a bell and they said, okay, you don't have to ask anything, you just look at the person next to you and see who they are. And I still have a really, really vivid picture of that person's eyes. It's like that thing, no matter how stupid it was as an exercise intellectually, had a real effect on my consciousness, and I was very high at that moment, and then I went out to this celebration of the dead friends. So then it's March. So I'd been there 2 months. It was March. I took sannyas, and so I was allowed then into darshan. I had a mala, and these were these lectures that that he gave every month. But interestingly enough, this particular month of March 1981 was the last time he gave public lectures. You see this book here? It doesn't have any printing on the outside. This book was printed in Antelope during the first days of the... Have you watched Wild Wild Country? Well, watch a little bit of it sometimes, because this was what happened. What basically, he came to Oregon. There I had gone to Pune because he was never going to leave there, and I needed him for enlightenment, and I'd come to make this real connection with him. And he spoke for 1 month, and then he went silent, and then he moved to Oregon, ultimately, which is a and
India?
from India, yeah, and bought this huge ranch in Central Oregon, around which there was this incredible drama of which I was mixed up in for about the first year and a half until it got a little weird.
What does that mean? It got a little weird.
Watch.
You can't.
There's a show on it.
It's a 6-part documentary on it on Netflix.
And you were actually there.
I was actually there for the first 2 episodes.
Okay.
and closely related to. Basically, I was in a unique position to know the people who were actually running the thing, as well as being, part of this whole movement to create a city in the desert that worked in a different way than the capitalist, oppressive, weird society worked. That we were all hippies. We dropped out, wanted to drop out of the regular world and build a new kind of culture. And we did amazing things over there. You watch the video and you see part of it. Most of it is focused on the politics that got really weird and involved guns and attempted murder and poisoning and weird shit. Anyway, come back to this book. So this is March of 1981, and this is the last public lecture he gives, and this is the transcription that they made of those lectures, I'll read a little bit of the introduction. This is the last series of discourses given in English by Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh, the enlightened master who in the 7 years between 1974 and 1981 gave a 2-hour discourse every morning to an international audience of disciples and seekers at Shree Rajneesh Ashram in Pune, India. The final series was delivered in Buddha Hall in March 1981. Shortly afterward, Bhagwan began the ultimate stage of his work, replacing verbal communication with satsang, a direct, silent, heart-to-heart communion between master and disciples. Many times in his discourses, Bhagwan had said that truth cannot be expressed through words, that it is a special transmission beyond all scriptures. And this is something which all the great masters down the ages have observed, that the ultimate truth can never be said, has never been said, will never be said. Nevertheless, nearly all of these enlightened beings made great efforts to give expression to the inexpressible so that the taste, a glimpse, and an insight can be conveyed to others and thus encourage them to discover truth within themselves. So, this is the lecture that he gave, the first lecture that he gave that month. The first question, Bhagwan, is the goose really out? Anand Bhavo, the goose has never been in. The goose has always been out. It is a Zen koan. First, you have to understand the meaning of the Zen and the meaning of the koan. Zen is not a religion, not a dogma, not a creed. Zen is not even a quest, an inquiry. It is non-philosophical. The fundamental of Zen approach is that all is as it should be, nothing is missing. This very moment, everything is perfect. The goal is not something somewhere else. It is here. It is now. Tomorrow doesn't exist. This very moment is the only reality. Hence, in Zen, there is no distinction between methods and goals, means and goals. A great philosophical official, Rico, once asked the strange Zen master Nansen to explain to him the old koan of the goose in the bottle. If a man puts a gosling into a bottle, said Rico, and feeds him until he is full grown, how can the man get the goose out without killing it or breaking the bottle? Nansen gave a great clap with his hands and shouted, Rico! Yes, master, said the official with a start. See? Said Nansen, the goose is out. So then that whole month he gives this ongoing lecture basically on this theme of this particular koan, which I thought, well, that's an interesting coincidence, since it was one of the first things I ever read that was of a spiritual nature that I didn't like, but remembered and was attracted to. So there was weird shit that went on for 3 years, and I came out of that basically over the idea that a group of people could get along and make the world a better place. There is something in human beings that's more problematical and difficult like that, and even the best of people can, under the oddest circumstances, end up trying to kill each other. And the best you can do is try to make friends with people with whom you can work, and keep a low profile. So I bought this house, and I started studying Tai Chi, and then Chinese medicine. And always I had this fantasy about meeting a true master, maybe up in the mountains in China. And so I kept on the lookout for an opportunity like this. And so I met this guy, Heiner. I ended up in 1995 doing this pilgrimage with Heiner to meet his Qigong Shifu on Mount Emei in Sichuan. Now, Mount Emei is one of the 5 sacred Buddhist mountains in China. It was where this system that now I teach was born in a cave in the 20s by a gathering of people who were orphans in terms of so much was happening and changing in China at the time. You know, people who had held secrets within families for generations. Basically, since the families, you know, everything was being turned upside down, came together to try to learn what they can by trading systems. And the Jinjing system was born on Emei Mountain sometime around 1925. This guy that taught this guy that Heiner knew. And we were going to go to this mountain and learn the first form of the Jinjing Gong. And I was quite excited by the possibility of actually learning from someone like this. This is Wang Qingyu, the guy we studied with, and to the right is a picture just as made by somebody from Wang's description, because he was very, very rural. There was nothing like cameras around when he was around, and Wang studied with him in a little tiny monastery up in the corner of Sichuan. I had this fantasy, and this is a picture of this Sichuan. This is what it's like. It's really cool. It's really mountainous. There are, you know, it goes up. It's about 5,000 feet, the Sichuan plain, and then it goes up to 10,000 feet to the Tibetan plain, and it's like in two different climates. This is a map of Sichuan. You can see it's like split in half by the Himalayas, essentially. The part that's green and below is where all the Chinese live. And it's like a floodplain, kind of like the Yellow River Valley, and it has a climate very similar to here. And then you've got this mountain range, and to the left, you've got the Tibetan Autonomous Region, which is like 10,000 feet, and it's all Tibetans that live there, though the Chinese have ruled it for thousands of years, really. It's the most traditional part of province of China. You go up into these mountains, and you climb up these stone paths, and it's like a mountain range, and all along they have these little monasteries. Now, you finally get to the main monastery on Emei after climbing, you know, for hours and hours up all these little paths. And what you find is that there's a cable car that they have going up the other side, and this whole sacred monastery that's 2,000 years old is flooded with masses of Chinese tourists and hippies, like, you know, guys with a monkey that want you to pay them to take the picture with the monkey, and hippies playing guitars, and it's like a tourist place, and people come there basically to get out of the heat and to play mahjong, and there's tinny radios playing all the time, and there's very little of the sacred that you feel there in the daytime. Now at night, that's another thing. And in the daytime, you don't really see any monks around. You see like tour guides walking through with masses of people with bullhorns. And they press the bullhorn and it bleats out in electronic music, happy birthday to you, happy birthday. And that lets people know that they're gathering to move to the next site. And there's herds of people moving through these monasteries like this. The Chinese are very into tourism. And they have no connect, at this time, this is 95, they have very, very little connection with any religion of any kind. It's just someplace they go to, because they can now go places in the 90s. If you ask, well, are there monks actually doing stuff here? They'll say, well, get up at 4 in the morning and come around to the sanctuary, and there they are. They get up before any of the tourists are there when the place is completely closed, and they do chanting at 4 in the morning. And this to me is boring. This is not what I came for, this kind of getting up early in the morning and chanting for hours at a time. This was not the China that I was hoping for. And although the system that we were learning from Wang was really wonderful and it was really having effect on me, he was a fairly ordinary guy, actually. He wasn't any Bhagwan. He wasn't any guy acting like he was enlightened. One of the interesting things that these people that I went with, Heiner and Sharon, do you know them? Do you know anything about them?
Of Heiner.
You've heard of Heiner. He's famous, and his wife Sharon is an interesting woman who also shares his interest in esoteric. And she was part of a woman's group, and they got together and meditated on the moon and the Mother Earth and channeled things. And Sharon got the message that when she went to China, she should go through the ceremony of having her head shaved, just because it was like some kind of maybe a remembrance of a past life. So every place that we went in China, to all the Buddhist monasteries, she would always ask them if they would shave her head. And they would tell her, no, this is ridiculous. This is some sort of a silly Western girl thing of just wanting to do something exotic. And no, if you're a serious Buddhist, you have to go through a whole process and take vows, and then we shave your head, and we're not going to do it. So this was, oh shoot, I'm out of time. I'm going to plow on for another 10 minutes. I'll finish it up because I'm too far into it to stop. And so she was constantly asking the different Buddhist nuns around, and she came excitedly to us then and said, I've found somebody that I think might do it. And she was not a Buddhist nun from that monastery. She was a Buddhist nun, and when we met her, she was really quite remarkable. She was very, very different than the people in the monastery where we were, that seemed like they were just like going through the motions like you do in any religion and singing this stuff, and it was not that profound. Now, she had a different look to her. And she was not from mainland Chinese. She was from Taiwan. She had grown up in Taiwan as a Chan Buddhist in a Chan Buddhist monastery, and she was now in her like 40s, I think, and had become basically a Zen Roshi, and the real thing. And she had like all the burn marks on her head, and she'd been initiated, and she was a somebody in Taiwan Buddhism, and her Shifu in Taiwan had told her, I think you need to go to mainland China and go to Emei Mountain. There's something waiting for you there. And so she'd undertaken this pilgrimage to come from Taiwan into mainland China in '95 to come to Emei to find something. So she was really totally open and very interested in whoever she might meet or whoever might be interested in her. And most of the Chinese monks there had no training, and she found us interesting, and Sharon particularly curious and open and was interested. And she said, well, I'm not going to shave your head, but if you want, I will give you a transmission. So, and everybody can come, and we'll do it. At night. These were the hallways of the monastery, polished floors and looking out into the distance, and it was a full moon. I'll give you a transmission, and everybody could listen. So at 9 o'clock we all gathered, and she sat with Sharon and talked to her about what it was that she was looking for and why she wanted her head shaven and what she was really interested in. And then she said, well, I'm going to give you a koan. And and this was all in Chinese, and my Chinese was very rudimentary then. It's even worse now. But I understood pretty much what she was saying, and they were translating a little bit, and what she gave her as a transmission was the goose in the bottle. And here I was, like on Mount Emei, the founding, the place where this particular practice that was going to become the center of my life was, hearing this koan again for the third time. It was a very memorable night. It like made a very, very intense impression on me, and that's her picture. And then Wong stayed up all night with her, talking to her, just the two of them, exchanging like that. And then Sharon found somebody that would cut her hair in a monastery. It's a matter of money in China. and okay. So that's the answer to your question about why a gold coin.
The goose is out.
The goose is out. It's there's no good answer. You're basically supposed to remember the story, remember the line, and not speculate about what it might be about. Just remember it and know that you don't know. And that's they're trying to figure out how to move people into a space in which they're comfortable not knowing. And in that space, then something different can come in. And maybe your understanding with it grows over years as you come in contact with it in different contexts. Okay. Good night, everybody.